The fact of the matter is that many people in the West, it seems like this really weird kind of like almost like racist kind of view is this idea that people in the third world are just like backwards people with bad ideas. And if we bully them enough, then they'll just do the right thing. When really what they're doing is they're people doing exactly what Destiny said, choosing the lesser of two evils.
Did you miss the part where they've been taking measures to decrease this?
I know. Yes, I hear you.
So it's just not fast enough for you.
They're not American.
So if it's not decreasing fast enough, then it's flourishing, basically.
If the slavers are not.
I've been very clear. I think I've been very specific about my language. I think you say things and then 5 minutes later forget you said them because again a little bit ago you advocated for individuals to not buy these things or to vote with their wallets, right? Now then when I brought that up, you said, "Oh no, I didn't say individuals shouldn't do that."
Okay.
Right? So like
I never said that.
Why does your frog have an eye ring?
Now. Around the world, there are millions of people in slavery / indentured servitude / bonded labor. In many countries, slavery is effectively unofficially sanctioned, India being chief among them. For nations that refuse to take serious action to end such practices, should the U.S. and other world powers consider sanctioning them or taking other corrective measures? Does it make a difference that some of these individuals signed a contract to enter into servitude? Or would the economic cost of ending slavery be too much to bear? Okay, yeah, so lots of, in case you don't know, slavery is not a thing of the past. It exists throughout the world, and it exists here. But there seems to be some countries that allow for more of it to exist than others. So for those nations, should we take action against them, right? And one of those actions could be sanctions.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of things done and signed under duress, no, I don't think a contract matters in cases of things like debt slavery, right? There's a reason why in the two example articles that we had to read for this, they note that debt slavery is technically illegal in India, in both of these articles are about indentured servitude in India. So yeah, it's technically illegal. There's just problems. The law is toothless and all these other criticisms, right? But the reason that is because there are certain situations where we say that people can't sign away certain rights or certain periods of their life and work and labor. And one of those is being in extreme debt. We're not letting people sell themselves into slavery to clear debt anymore, and we don't have debt prisons in the U.S. anymore, thankfully, in a lot of ways. But but it obviously still exists. As far as whether or not we should sanction these nations, what we should do about it, I don't know. I'm very small brain on this. I do political science, but I do political theory, which is just reading and writing about dead people. So I feel like I should leave it to like my colleagues in international relations, who are probably dumber than us theorists, to tell me whether or not that sanctions work. Or how we can accomplish them most effectively. I do think there is a problem that we should talk about where if we decide to have a kind of moral framework on an international scale and we decide to stop doing business with nations based on them doing things that we don't like, we're going to have some real problems with, like oil interests in Saudi Arabia and things like that, right? Like there's a whole host of countries that we have very close ties with who have very different views than the current U.S. mainstream on social issues and religious issues, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't really know how we parse that out. Is slavery the thing, or are there other things that we need to be considering moral sanctions for? I'm not sure, so y'all can convince me, maybe.
Thanks so much. Stardust, please.
Yep. So sanctions, from what I could read on sanctions in favor of human rights, they have mixed results. In a country like India, where the government's taking measures to fix the situation, although they're not the best at enforcing it, I don't think sanctions are helpful. Probably aid would be more helpful in alleviating the circumstances that create create bonded labor, create people who end up entering into those contracts. I mean, to even do sanctions, we would have to determine what counts as unjust and what counts as forced labor. And I don't know if we can intervene just because a country's bad at enforcing the law. I just think in general it would be better if we provided aid, especially to developing countries where this is happening.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I kind of agree with both Ukerist and Stardust here for the most part. Obviously, slavery is wrong. Bonded labor, as it looks in India and in many other countries, it's essentially slavery. Especially when you're talking about children whose ability to consent is even, doesn't exist, right? But the problem that I see most with this idea of sanctions and things like that is the major reason that these things still exist. It's not culture. There's been a lot of studies that have shown that it's not culture that causes these things. What it is poverty. Poverty causes these things. And the best way to solve poverty is with aid, is with additional resources and things of that nature, but it's also to allow their economy to flourish. So if you're going after countries and inducing like economic sanctions against them based off of the moral actions of slavery, you're just prolonging what is already a problem here, which is the poverty that exists that is helping support this behavior. I mean, when you look at the article that Primecayes showed, there was a father that they described as indifferent because he basically sold his child to slavery, and he's like, well, I have 7 mouths to feed. Like, what the fuck did you want me to do? And that's really the crux of the problem here, is that we need education, we need resources, we need economic activity, and you're not going to be able to produce and stimulate positive economic activity unless while also sanctioning a country, right? It's just the two goals work against each other. So, I mean, if you want to stop these things, you can't engage in sanctions. And like I said, bonded labor is essentially slavery, and there's no real distinction there.
Okay. I'm pretty sure while Steven's away, right, this is a admission that I'm right. That whatever it is my position is on this topic, that I'm right. That's what he said. Steven, you made it back.
I'm going to give the hot take that slavery is wrong. I think I don't know how many other people feel that way on this panel. Sanctioning countries seems to be not a good idea, just because I don't think you're going to get everybody else on board with it. I think that usually when I hear about people making progress in other countries when it comes to things like labor rights, usually it's through the form of these negotiated trade agreements. So for instance, Vietnam was supposed to have historic labor reforms in order to join the TPP. A lot of these labor unions will get together and kind of negotiate these agreements across seas, because not only is it good to make it so there's no slave labor in another economy because of moral reasons, it's also good for your own economy because you don't want to have your own workers necessarily competing with people that are like slaves, because it causes a whole bunch of bad shit happening all around. So I think that we should negotiate these things economically. I think aid is always good. I don't know if you can ever fix a country's institutional poverty with any amount of aid, but I think that just sanctioning the fuck out of poor countries who have people that are turning to bonded slavery because they're poor doesn't seem to be a good route to go. I don't think that'll affect the changes that we want. I
guess my position on, obviously slavery is bad, but I actually don't think I'd consider bonded labor a form of slavery. I think it's totally reasonable to have a system in which people are allowed to bargain using their labor, right, to get loans or whatever the fuck. That seems fine to me. And calling those people victims of slavery, I think waters down what slavery actually is. But so that being said, I think that if we were to end actual slavery, human beings owning other human beings, and even through their birth or through birth owning their children and shit like that, then I think that sanctions might be good in some cases, but I think you could even argue that you might need to go further, like the UK did. Right, the Royal Navy freed lots of slaves, right, all over the planet. They started refusing to do trade with countries and with ports that had slaves, right, and through this they actually forced some of these places to change their policies, right, and while doing this they used their Royal Navy to attack slave ships, right, and to free the slaves that were on them, right. So I think if you're going to do this, I don't think half measures work. I think you need to go full speed and be open to using even force to change these people's the laws or whatever the fuck in their land that's allowing people to be sold into slavery.
Thank you so much. We'll go to open panel. But also, guys, sub to the channel. Give subs. How about the channel? All right, go ahead. Open the panel.
I guess maybe we could turn this into a fight based on what Dooby said about like the definition of slavery we want to work with, right? Because if we're just talking about chattel slavery, which is what you've described, where you literally own a person like you would own any other piece of property, and you own their descendants as well. Okay, yeah, I mean that's not necessarily what's happening here, right? It does happen still in places in the world, but it's not what we're talking about in this case with, you know, people in great debt or just super poor, you know, basically bonding off their children for a period of time. But what we are talking about is the kind of slavery that's defined in like the 13th Amendment, which says like slavery or involuntary servitude. They're kind of conflated in a sense. And involuntary servitude, if we're you know, still talking about things that are done under duress, can like something that is involuntary, something that is not meaningfully and freely chosen, could still be something like, well, you have the option of, you know, this infinitely exponential debt, or you can work for me in horrific conditions for the next 10 years and then I'll forgive your debt, right? Like that's not a super meaningful choice in the sense that we normally mean having a free voluntary choice. So
yeah, but I feel like that line of thinking leads you to the shitty economy position that in a capitalist system, all work is slavery, right? All work is exploitation. All of it's slavery because you need a job, you need food to feed yourself, and if you don't feed yourself, you're gonna end up on the street and die, right? So
yeah, but I
think that's, well, how?
Because so one's voluntary and one's involuntary.
No, that's
he gave
okay,
it to you in the definition.
Bonded laborers, right, aren't like scooped up and forced to sign a contract, right? These are people
they literally are.
No, they're not. No, these are people who have taken loans from a business, from a person, and the way that they're going to repay this loan is through labor over time, because they don't have the capital to pay it up front.
They don't have the ability to leave.
They do have the ability to leave when they pay off the loan.
Would you allow them to opt in for suicide?
Oh my God, Stardust, fuck off.
Wait, can we get Prime, can you define what are we talking about here? What kind of labors are we talking about? Because I think this is probably going to be incredibly important to this conversation topic, right?
I'm talking about a wide variety of a enforced labor, right? So I guess I maybe I see what the problem you're talking about. So some of it no, maybe I don't, because all of it's coerced, right? So it's
yeah, but there's going to be levels of coercion. Like it's kind of coercive
exactly.
if I take out like a loan, a payday loan, and I've got to work to pay back the payday loan. But I don't know if we're all going to say that's the same level of coercion as like somebody, you know, like captures my family and forces me to take like a false visa and work in another. Like, these are different things, right?
We're talking about this wide spectrum, and we could talk about how do we deal with each of those levels, right? So bonded labor, right? We can talk about that, and then like straight up fucking slavery, right? Indentured servitude. We can talk about all of that, and if they require a different response. But yes, these are things where you just don't have a choice about it. Go ahead. So
I have a like this. I mentioned earlier when Dooby was going off, and I actually kind of weirdly agreed with what he was saying, but he said it was a dumb point. I think it wasn't a dumb point. Right? I said, yeah, let's talk about the servile state, right? So everybody should read Hilaire Belloc's The Servile State, and one of the things that he says in that is like assessing whether or not a state is servile in comparison to the literal like servile system, the feudal system. He's like, you know, you're born on the land, you work for the Lord, you're forced to toil here, you don't have any say in the issue, there's no meaningful freedom, right? That dissolves at a certain point, and now we've moved into a new system of production. What's it actually like? Is it any meaningfully different in terms of being servile? And one of the questions that he asks towards the end is, if you were to approach those millions of families now living at a wage with a proposal for a contract of service for life, guaranteeing them employment at what each regarded as his usual full wage, how many would refuse? Or the implication is most people would take this, right? And the reason that they would take it is because they don't see their life getting better, and they don't see really any other option than what they're doing, which is working at a wage, just struggling to get by, usually in debt, right? The choice is not in that case super meaningful. Yes, they could technically refuse if we're presenting this hypothetical. Yes, yes, there are technically other options, but especially in this case with like what we were talking about with like the Indian father, it's like, look, I have this many kids, I have this many mouths to feed. What are my options here? Either some of them die, some of them starve to death, some of them die young, or I let him go work in a horrific condition and he earns a wage that enables us not to default on our debt and enables me to survive and the rest of our family to survive. Like, yeah, it's not fully free in the way that we would like it to be, at the very least. If we want to distinguish it between, you know, actually kidnapping and selling people, yes, we should distinguish those things, but it's not as if it is a fully free choice.
So bonded slavery in India specifically, since that's kind of what we were primed with the articles, right? Most of these people don't know that bonded labor is illegal. Most of these people have no idea that they can go to the government and get assistance and get their children an education. Most of these people aren't aware that it's been illegal since the 70s and that the Supreme Court in India reaffirmed it in the 80s and made extremely strict language in their affirmation that stated that bonded labor was a form of slavery. Most of these people don't have access to any of those things. Most of these people don't even speak the same language as where they're from, as they are moved and displaced and in many ways tortured with work, so that they're in a place where they don't even speak the language and they have to learn a language and they actually forget the language of like the rest of their family. It is a entirely different situation than, let's say, someone who has a temporary choice to work a job that they can quit and then there's no monopoly there and they can go look for another job. These people are, for all intents and purposes, believe that they have signed away all of their rights and that there's nothing they can do and they must obey their masters. And that's why rape is such an extremely likely thing for girls. And it is why when you speak to experts, one of them would be Dr. Kevin Bales talks a lot about this there's an NPR article you can look at, but he wrote a bunch of books. He teaches about contemporary slavery in England. For the it's usually the women that lead these like anti-slavery movements and like awakening things. And that's because so many of them have been so severely raped over and over again by their masters that they don't want that life for their daughters. And it's usually the men that have just been physically exerted in a lot of ways. And so these movements usually start with the women. They have to infiltrate these communities with spies. And these spies have to come in and talk to them and start to psychologically work with them because they have no idea that they're not slaves. These people are slaves.
Okay, so appealing to the ignorance of these people who signed into like contracts without understanding the contract, I guess you know that's an issue. But it seems like the issue is their ignorance, right? So like if they knew that you know they could read the contract, they understood the contract, they could speak the language, right? But they still were in in desperation. They needed food, they needed clothing, whatever it was. So they took this loan and they signed themselves up for 10 years of labor. Right, in exchange for this loan, right? Is that okay, or is it specifically the conditions, right, that are the issue?
First of all, you can sign one, but there's no such thing as a valid contract where the person gets to own the right to your body and you can't leave that contract. You can still owe that person money. Like you can agree to work for someone with contract work and then be like, yeah, fuck this place, I'm out. And then you owe them money.
Yeah, but if these people are specifically like, signing away
it's not a valid contract.
If these people are specifically signing away their labor, right? Like why shouldn't they be allowed to do that?
Why shouldn't they be allowed to do that?
Because they're selling their children into labor. Right.
That's part of it.
Well, they own their children, right? So if you're in a country where hold on, they do. I mean,
technically,
so if you're in a country where the reality of life is this kind of desperate struggle, right? And your options are, hey, your kid stays at home with probably nobody to take care of them, right? Or they work out here with you, where you can watch them and they earn some money, right? It seems like a lot of these people are going to take the second option, right? And that might be okay. I feel like these children. I feel like these child labor laws are like a first world luxury, right? In a lot of these places, it's just not realistic.
No, I mean, I literally did a giant debate on this not too long ago, right? In terms of child labor laws. But the fact of the matter is that you're asking whether or not they can do this and whether or not this is wrong, not whether or not these laws should exist or are effective, and not whether or not we should be using sanctions as a means of stopping it, right? So we're at a definitional level here, and what I'm saying is definitionally it's slavery.
I don't think it is. Right? Maybe there's some people that would make that requirement, but I think if they've signed a contract, right? You could say, hey, they didn't meet I think what's called like the pillars of like a contract or whatever the fuck, where you need to understand the contract, you need to consider the contract, you need to like you can't be under like any form of coercion. You'd be of like sound mind, right? If they don't meet those requirements, and I think we use those here in the United States, I don't know if they have them in India, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe you could say, hey, the contract's not valid because this person literally didn't understand what they were signing, right? But if they did,
an unconscionable contract, right?
Yeah, sure, I can understand that. That's I understand, but if they did understand what they were signing, if they did understand that they were signing up for 10 years of hard labor in exchange for this loan or whatever it is they're getting, right? Why shouldn't they be allowed to do that?
Because I've already told you that. We're just getting in circles. We just disagree.
Wait, hold on. You just don't think that you just don't think they should. You think someone shouldn't have
I don't think it's a valid contract.
Sign away
I don't think you can sign away your rights via contract. You can't sign away your rights via contract unless you are of the opinion that rights are simply created by the state. And then if that is your opinion, I understand that we disagree and we will likely never
But people
agree.
sign away their rights all the time through like their for example, their ability to speak about a certain topic. Right? They'll sign that away through a contract. Right? Like
a non-disclosure agreement is a whole nother host of issues that could be debated, I'm sure. I guess. Yeah.
Okay, but it's people signing away one of their rights, one of their fundamental rights, right? The right of expression in a contract. Why is the right to like labor or this right specifically so important to you? Even if they
do you know how an NDA works?
As part of this contract,
part
of the labor that they were doing was like sex work. Right, they had to have sex with this person who's giving them the loan.
Don't try and run away from it.
Again, why would that be an issue?
Don't try and run away from it. So an NDA, right? An NDA, right? What's the difference between an NDA and the situation we're describing, and why are we saying that an NDA isn't slavery, but bonded labor is slavery?
I'm not arguing that NDAs are slavery. You said.
But why is there a difference? You said it's okay to sign away your rights.
I don't think it's that different, right? So, you said that people cannot sign away their rights through contracts. I've given you an example where you can literally do that and be legally enforced.
Poor Dooby. Let me explain this to you. So, what happens if you violate an NDA?
You get taken to court, probably get sued.
Right, and you owe money.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So, what happens if you just go and you're in India and you're in bonded labor and you say, Master, I don't want to work today. I think I don't like the terms of our contract. They beat the dog shit out of you. And if you're a woman, they rape you and then they put you back in the fucking field.
That's not true. Yeah, that is not true. These people, because this is bonded labor, right? They have a way to pay themselves out of this contract. Right. If they don't like the contract, they can get the money to pay out of it, right? Or they can get their family to gather the money and pay it for them.
Oftentimes, the way that they're being paid is really unfair. So, any normal person would have paid off that debt long before the person in that bonded labor contract is able to do so.
Yeah, that's the issue of some of these contracts, right? Where they will add on money, they'll add on like unreasonable interest, shit like that, right?
But I mean, but that's part of what we have in the American system, right? And why the Supreme Court decided that what an unconscionable contract is. And that was determined off of a woman that went to a payday loan, right? Barely spoke English. And the payday loan contract was written in like extreme legalese. And she ended up thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in debt, not understanding the contract. And the Supreme Court decided that this contract is unconscionable because it's written in a way that she really couldn't understand the terms of the agreement and didn't understand the effects of what was occurring. And that's what we're talking about in bonded labor. So that just made the entire contract invalid, right? To where she didn't have to pay a dime or anything. But in order for a contract to be valid, you have to have an exit. You have to be able to exit the contract. You may owe some restitution, you may owe some property or some money or something, right? Some currency. But when you're in a situation where you're in bonded labor, you don't get to exit. You're kidnapped. You're taken away from places.
That's not true.
You're hidden from the authorities. Okay, if you're just going to deny the horrors of slavery that are occurring, then like I'm denying
your fucking rhetoric about what bonded labor is. Right, I'm sure that happens to some of these people.
Good guy, Dooby, the slavery apologist in India. Like,
hold on,
whatever, dude.
No, I'm saying, oh God.
We need one advocate, I guess, at least. So.
I'm not advocating for slavery. I'm advocating for the ability for somebody to sign away their labor in a contract. Like that doesn't seem that controversial to me. I understand that some of these people who maybe lots of these people who sign those contracts in India right now are being exploited. Sure, right? But I'm saying. If you have the ability to understand the contract, and if you know, hey,
sure, we're talking about some 18 million people.
Yeah, and within that 18 million people, can you not imagine that some of these people aren't fucking ignorant and understand what they're signing?
The difference is that this, if it was an adult signing their labor away, I think it's still exploitative, but. I think it would be a little bit. It's slavery, yeah, but the point, what we're talking about here is that it's the prevalence of how often they sign away their children into labor. And this is like a 13-year-old kid. There's no way that they're going to pay off like $10,000.
Here's the question: if there was hypothetically, I'm going to use a loaded term here. I'm going to say fair. Okay, if there was a fair labor market, do you think that people that ever engage in these bonded labor contracts, Dooby?
I think so. Somebody let's say somebody wanted to buy like a new gaming PC and they didn't want to save it up, save up at work, whatever the fuck. They get the loan, they sign away, work on weekends for, however long, and they get the gaming PC right now. I can imagine people doing that.
Right. Well, what happens when they get raped when they show up to their job?
Well, I don't think people should be getting raped, obviously.
Right, and then,
right? But I do think
there now. Are they?
No, obviously not. I don't think signing away labor. That's what we're
talking about when we're talking about labor in India.
I don't think signing away labor implies that people can just torture you and rape you and do whatever the fuck they want to you. Like I mentioned, they have some kind of rights. Right?
Yeah. So bonded labor. Let's just make believe, right? That you could have a fair workplace environment. Safe. A safe workplace environment that you were going to pay off your debt, but you had 8-hour days, right, rather than 14-hour days. For instance, the Indian brick kilns, oftentimes during the summer, 14-hour days these people have to work. But let's say you worked 8-hour days, and I gave you proper food and water, the basics, right? Would that preclude some of your preclude your arguments against it, or against Dooby? Excuse me.
No, it's the argument is not about the type of labor or how hard it is, right? The argument isn't even necessarily the working conditions. The argument is that in order for it not to be slavery, I have to have an exit from the contract, and these people are tortured and manipulated and hidden from the truth to believe that they have no exit, and they are punished by masters that maintain their power over them so that they don't have the ability to exit the contract.
No, I get you. I get that. But I think what Dooby is trying to do is test your limits here as to where your objection is. Is it bonded labor in general, or bond as a concept, or bonded labor plus everything else that goes along with it, right? So
plus these working conditions and being raped and shit, and hidden from society or whatever the fuck.
And with bonded labor, there's an exit, right? There's an exit being once you pay off, right? That's your exit. You pay off your contract.
That's not an exit.
Okay.
Oftentimes,
right? You have to be able to exit at any moment, or you no longer have your freedom. Therefore, you are a slave.
Well, and also, as the situations as described in this article are, you're locked into a contract basically where you are working and the wage you are making is not enough to keep up with the exponential interest on the loan. So it's not really, the exit is not as clear cut or definable, right?
I mean, there are people that do bonded labor for 6 or 7 years in India and then pay off their debts. It happens, right? there are also people that get help from anti-slavery organizations and underground tunnels doing everything they can to inform people of their rights, because it's illegal in India despite there being almost 20 million people enslaved.
Right. So this was a question I had. Sorry if I missed you guys talking about this. My baby was waking up. But the question that we had was basically, what should the U.S. do, right, in this case where, like as Stardust pointed out, right, like it's a case where a country is kind of failing to effectively enforce its own law and is doing something that we already think is bad, and they clearly already think is bad, at least on paper. Right. So what is the steps? What are the steps that should be taken in that case? Like I'm not sure. Like as like Destiny said, right? The effectiveness of sanctions in the case where like you're sanctioning a country with a bunch of starving people is not really. It's not right. Like it's a different case from like sanctioning a country to punish them for doing some sort of like military offensive action that threatens the U.S. interests. Right. Those are different sorts of.
We don't have a crystal ball, but we do have examples of what happens when nation states attempt to intervene in these markets, right, from the outside. And when you start threatening sanctions, like one example, and I've talked about this recently, is in Bangladesh in 1992, Senator Harkin was threatening to sanction and boycott goods in the ready-made garment industry in Bangladesh. And what ended up happening, even though the legislation itself didn't pass, what ended up happening was in 1992 and 1993, that industry fired 50,000 child workers, right? They said, okay, we're going to comply. We're going to get rid of these child workers. We know that you guys like are threatening us. We want to kill this bill kind of thing. Like we don't want this to be an issue. And so UNICEF in 1997, and interestingly enough, even though I fucking hate the guy, Paul Krugman, left-wing economist, right? Them and Oxfam, several people looked at studies and went to find these children. And what they found was that the overwhelming majority of these children ended up in more dangerous professions, that they went into the black market with less regulation, that many of them were sold into child sex trafficking, were sent out of the country, where their passports were taken and disappeared into sex trafficking and things of that nature. So like when you talk about sanctions and heavy-handed things like this at a state that's already failing to control what it believes to be morally perverse, you're not doing anything to help here. If you want to help, you have to help by changing the economic conditions. Like, not to be too much of a materialist here, right? Or I'll end up sounding like a fucking socialist, but like you have to change the economic conditions on the ground in some capacity so that the poverty is gone. The poverty and the lack of education is what's causing this more than anything. And of course, war, when we're talking about like the Congo, but that's a different situation.
I'm curious, you talk about how like there's like how would you consider like most debt? Do you consider most debt unethical? Because at the end of the day, technically you have to give some of your labor to pay it back or else you're going to go to jail. Or should debt not be enforceable by a prison sentence? Or
what do you mean by most debt?
So like let's say that you take out a loan, and let's say that you don't pay the loan back. At some point, somebody's going to say that like somebody should be able to imprison you because eventually somebody's going to try to sue you for the money. If you don't pay the money, there might be like a summons, and then like at the end of the road, it's going to be a prison sentence, right?
No, I don't. I kind of already hinted at this earlier. I don't believe in involuntary prison sentences.
Yeah, but then like, so just theoretically in that society, you ever worry that there's just like no way that anybody ever takes out a loan or issues debt because you have no guarantee at the end of the day you'll ever get the money back?
Well, no, I think what people would do is people would have insurers, right? I mean, it's essentially the same thing as like when your parent co-signs a loan for you, right? You want to get a car, you're 16 and like you're upper middle class, you want to get a new car, right? But like you can't, like they'll never loan you a fucking car because you're a 16-year-old dumbass, but your parents will co-sign for you, right? And then they do the same thing. I don't see any reason why insurance companies wouldn't do the same thing and people would refuse to do interaction with
somebody's just like, I'm not going to pay you back. What happens at the end of the day?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of market solutions.
There's risk.
Right, there's a lot of market solutions.
I want to hear one of them. That's what I want to hear one of them. So let's say like,
so one of them, like most peaceful, right, would be simply persona non grata. Your credit is destroyed. No one will loan money to you ever again. No one will want to do business with you again. No one's going to want to help or do anything with that. And if you have to get a co-signer of an insurance in order to do type of business, your rates are going to go up, right? So
that
someone
means
that
effectively that every single poor person in this economy is never taking out a loan, right? Because nobody would loan to a poor person if there's no recompense at the end of the day. Like you have no guarantee.
Right, but like I said, you would have insurance, right? So you could
if you're a poor person, you can't afford whatever you need a loan for. Well, how would you be able to afford insurance?
Okay, well, so now you have to engage with what is a poor person and what is the economic material conditions of what.
Sure, the economic material conditions is whatever exists today in America, and a poor person is whatever exists today in America. How do one of these poor people go out and get a loan if there's no ability to pursue that loan at the end of the day from a legal perspective?
Okay, so again, this person is so destitute that they have an inability to gain any type of insurance or anything like that.
Okay, wait, hold on. You're making this sound ridiculous, but that's not ridiculous. There are plenty of working poor people that can't afford.
No, I'm not trying to make it sound ridiculous.
I don't know what to say. It's not like.
They're like a buy here, pay here car place, which is a place that will finance on their own, and they don't go through like any sort of like banker finance.
Right. So again, yeah. So I mean, like, you have welfare systems with the state that we currently have, right? But there's also pro bono situations for people to be able to get lawyers, for example, right? I think the economy would look drastically different. So the economy would look drastically different than, let's say, a nation state that enforces poverty in many ways via, inflation that occurs, via, an overly burdensome tax system, via like the way that regulatory capture occurs in the state. Like, there are a lot of problems that I think the state involves in that makes people poorer than they would be under the system in which I advocate for. And I just don't see that being as big of an issue as it is today. And I believe that charity and that it creates a market void for systems that the state is currently handling in order for people to live in a happier, healthier society. I have a whole video on it. I don't want to go too far into it. If you want to check it out at some point, I can DM it to you and like not mention it here so that it's not like I'm trying to get clout or something.
Okay, so for this to work, it would be a whole reshuffling of the system, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty fucking radical as an anarchist. Who would have thought?
Okay.
I mean, I'll begin by saying, as I have said many times on Prime's panels before, usury is a sin and should still be a crime. Okay, so just getting that out of the way. But I guess my question is like, why do you think, Destiny, that like payday loan places? There are lots of circumstances, it seems to me, in our current system that I think is exploitative of poor people in a lot of ways, where amounts are loaned out that they cannot reasonably expect will be paid back, I don't think
that happens in today's system. No,
I think like the people that I know who are able to go get.
What about payday loans?
That's what I'm saying. Like absurd amounts
most people assume you're going to be able to either pay back the payday loans, or the charges are so high that you assume a high rate of default on them.
Right. So that's I guess what is the incentive in that system to loan back? Like, is it just it works out in the wash that enough people are
payday loans are profitable? Yeah, they must be, right? If these companies exist, otherwise they wouldn't exist, right?
Yeah, typically they'll ask you when you're like
usually they'll have a dig on your next paycheck, basically.
Exactly.
You have to take your next paycheck, cash it to them, and that's how these places could work. Yeah.
Do you think that's ethical? Do you think we should have payday loans?
I don't think credit cards should exist, but
okay. We agree.
I'm just saying that under the no, we absolutely don't agree, because all forms of loaning shouldn't exist, because that doesn't make sense. We wouldn't expect every citizen to carry the adequate amount of capital at every point in time for every purchase in their life. You should be able to take a loan out for money. I think there's times where that trade makes sense. But I mean, like, I think there are forms of loans that prey on people's financial ineptitude. So
I think there are forms of loans that you can expect recompense that are not necessarily the same as usury. Like we can hash this out, but
what is hold on, I'm sorry. My understanding, usury just means loaning something with an interest rate. What does usury mean to you?
Well, that's complicated in the modern financial system, right? Like usurious interest and interest are not necessarily the same thing, because like there's like expected productivity with the money, and then there's like beyond that, right? And in an inflationary system, we're at a like things get wacky ethically. But
wait, hold on.
Usury is No,
high
usury
interest
is
rate.
loaning thing at an interest rate beyond some reasonable level of interest.
Yeah.
Right.
Not,
Well,
not in the way
traditionally,
that he was using it though, because unless Ukerist, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Catholics believe that like loaning with interest at all is a sin. Right. This is why like in the olden
that is
days
the like
they
historical
forced
traditional position.
Jews to do the bankings.
Yes, that was the historical traditional position. Yes, but I feel like I think there's lots of actual like modern Catholic social thought economics on this. Like,
okay, gotcha. So usury is bad tautologically because it means that you're loaning at exploitative interest rates.
Yeah.
Right. In a system in an inflationary system, right? There's an expected productivity of money that we can kind of baseline, and so like yes, like loaning out to say like yes, you should be doing something, and we should like, you know, the profits can be split, or you know, there's all sorts of ways we can hash this out, right? But there's
sure, but that's not going
like
to work for the average consumer because not everybody is taking a loan out with the idea of capitalizing on that and increasing like revenues in the future or something, right? Like some people.
No,
like,
so
in
in a sense, in my ideal society, I'm not anarchist, but I'm somewhat optimistic like Scott, where I feel like, you know, like I think charitable loaning exists. Charitable loaning exists right now, where we have like these micro loan apps that people loan all sorts of money out at no interest. Like this already happens, and people are taking a loss on a large amount of money that they're loaning out. And
wait, do you think that is adequately that could adequately address the needs of the majority of the population, like charity loans?
Well, I mean, so
not necessarily, but I think it's better than usury or better than credit cards. And better
there are actually systems of healthcare coverage that certain Christian groups have engaged in.
Christian Care Medishare, yeah.
Right. So what they'll do is instead of having the healthcare system like a company like we have today, it runs much more like a co-op, which is hilarious that the Christians are more socialist than the lefties that hate the Christians so much. But what they'll do is they'll create progressive systems where they'll say like, here's your income. We want you to pay this amount. And then what they'll do is for any large purchases that they don't have in the fund, they basically do like these GoFundMe internal healthcare systems where everybody gets sent this thing like, hey, Christy needs a heart transplant and we're short $1 million. Like, please work on this thing. And so they use a charity model and a progressive, like kind of co-op model in order to create a healthcare system that tends to be more effective and but it's not for profit than for-profit insurance companies and are adequately able to handle everybody's health insurance needs based off of like a Christian co-op model in that regard. So there are a lot of more advanced ways to do things than just like someone at your church loans you $100, right?
Yeah. I mean, like if I'll say what, like I grew up relatively poor and we had Christian Care Medishare most of my life. And there are huge downsides. There are lots of issues,
especially if you want birth control.
Yes, I will say one thing for the people that I grew up with is they're really good at forming organizations and institutions to address these sort of things. The same thing is similarly true within homeschooling, where like there's local parallel institutions that like really develop to try to like shore up the local resources that they have. They're really good at it in a lot of ways, and I also kind of want to go back to these people now and be like, you realize that this is like what a lot of the people you think are stupid are advocating for, right? This communal co-op kind of stuff, like I don't know, but yeah, I don't think microloans are the solution to debt slavery in India. I'm just saying like it exists already, and I think it's obviously morally preferable to payday loans.
So the corrosion of payday loans, saying that like we can garnish your wages, we can like hit you with these crazy high interest rates, and like they're just absolutely ridiculous. If you ever looked into it, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like that makes. Go ahead.
Sorry. No, but the garnishment of wages is extremely rare in these situations. Most payday loans don't even really like they exist on American soil, but they're based in like Native American reservation. Like there's a whole history of payday loans that are like really like if you really want to get into that. But yeah, that's not as common. But again, it's not bonded labor. It's not debt slavery because you can opt out of this, right? Like at any one point in time, you can say, I'm done with this. I have the freedom of movement. I can go work somewhere else. I can go do other things. Just because you have a debt, it's not the same thing as debt slavery.
So is that your exit? Your exit is to like simply leave and not pay back. Right?
Just default and not pay back.
Yeah,
that is a possible exit.
In prison, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Can you say yes? It does. That's where defaulting ends. If you refuse to pay it back,
can you give me one example? Can you give me one example of a human in all of America that has gone to jail for defaulting on a payday loan? Can you give me one? Just one?
That I know personally? No, but
no. Can you Google and find one person? I'm just curious. Like, I don't know. I haven't Googled it. I'm willing to bet there hasn't been one.
Wait, so nothing is actionable legally. If your wages are garnished and everything else, you can't. There's no like civil penalties or anything where you can end up in jail at the end of that.
I just want you to find me one where that's ever happened.
I'm not Googling shit for you after hearing like, well, I've heard about this person all night. I'm good on that one.
Okay,
from what I said earlier is when I said like debtors' prisons don't really exist in the same way they used to. Like in the founding era, like we had one of our founding Supreme Court justices literally spent like a decade in debtors' prison, like literally just in prison because he was a gambler. Like it's just crazy.
All of Georgia.
But yeah, but now what we have that people call debtors' prisons are people who have things like traffic fines and things like that who end up in prison. But I am fairly
the state will do that.
I am fairly sure that like when it comes to things like payday loans, defaulting and then bankruptcy is the traditional path, and you don't. I'm not sure that there ever ends up being any actual incarceration for those things. But if people have examples, they can correct.
If you
I just don't think that's you can find any because I just don't think that exists.
There are debtor prisons in America.
Right, again, like I said, there's a distinction between the state. The state does whatever the fuck it wants to do.
Well, okay. I guess my question is, aside from the anarchist points, right? In terms of debtors' prisons, right? Like, I am curious about the actual examples of people when it comes to, like an actual like a loan. Like I go down to the payday cash loan that's like 5 minutes away from me in the bad part of town, right? And I default on that, and I refuse to pay. They go through all the options of hitting my credit, of taking liens, garnishing my wages, whatever. Are there points where that person, not for failing to pay a traffic ticket, not for failing to appear in court, those sorts of things, but that person for failing to pay a debt ends up in prison? I
guess if you're willing to forfeit all of your non-essential assets at the end of the day, I guess probably not. If you're willing to go like
file bankruptcy. Right?
Yeah, if you go Chapter 7 and you want to dump all of your non-essential assets, I think they'll let you keep a car in your house, and I guess you can avoid it if you're willing to go that route. But
yeah, like what if you refuse to liquidate your assets, right? If they came to collect your assets, then I think you would go to prison for like disobeying the judge's orders. I mean, it is unlikely that a person would go this far.
Hi, horses.
It's unlikely because the consequences, right? We have a whole spectrum of consequences beforehand that suck, right?
And so your credit's going to be fucked for 7 years if you do the bankruptcy route.
Yeah, it's awful, but so like personal example, right? Like my dad is just on disability. That's all the money that he has, but he gets loans out the ass all the time, and he's defaulted on I don't know how many of them, right? And they just get sent to creditors, and the creditors eventually give up, right? He's got medical bills out the ass. It's just like people just give up, right? He's not going to prison for that. He's going to prison for other things. But like the debt is never factored into this, right? So like it's just people just give up eventually. Like so the people who own your debt, like the hospital or the payday loan place, will eventually punt it over to a creditor. It'll eventually get sold and shopped around as sold at a discount to somebody who thinks that they can collect on it. And then when they can't, they usually just kind of give up. Like it's a weird system.
It's usually, I mean, depending upon the price, it's usually more expensive to go after the debt than to just forgive the debt at a certain point. But again, yes, is it technically possible, right, that you refuse to pay people over and over and over again? You refuse to, after it's sent to collections, you refuse to get on any reasonable payment plan. You refuse to use the legal system if it really is like a payday loan situation that is out of control and unreasonable. And you refuse any of those options. At a certain point, yes, you do owe them money if they gave you money, right? Maybe not to the terms of the contract that you signed if we're talking about payday loans where it might be an unconscionable agreement or it might just be ridiculous. But you do owe them something, right? And so at a certain point, yeah, they have a right to come and take some of your property. Yeah, but I fail to see how we go down this rabbit hole in payday loans to try and make this comparison that, oh, well, it's kind of like debt slavery. when there's a very, very key distinction here. And the key distinction is that debt slavery and bonded labor takes away your liberty of movement and takes away your liberty to your own body. That's what makes it slavery.
Okay. So I wanted to move on to what is response. So India is, from what I can see from the World Atlas, apparently the third largest exporter of bricks, with 250 billion bricks being created annually. And they are made of these brick kilns, and according to another site, 96% of the people in these brick kilns are in bondage slavery, and up to 23 million of them, period, right? Up to 23 million people might be within some sort of slavery, bondage slavery, whatever, right? So I hear you when you say that India has made it illegal, right? And big quotes there, illegal. But with a system this large, it seems like they're not actually taking it seriously. It seems like the people who are in those positions are within marginalized groups, right? Within lower castes, and the system doesn't actually care, and that is effectively unofficially sanctioned. So if that's the case, then shouldn't we? What steps should we take to put an end to that? Now, since this is so big, since it's a huge export, I couldn't find numbers as to how many Indian bricks actually make it to like the United States or Western nations. I couldn't find that. But let's say a fuck ton, and the results of sanctioning them and maybe not using their bricks would actually be huge against our big industry. Is it worth it, no matter what the economic cost?
It's a waste of money. It's a waste of hurting the lives of Indians. It's a waste of hurting the lives of Americans. It's a total waste of money that is not going to help the situation. What we need to do is we need to engage in several things. If I'm gonna, like Destiny said, I hate fucking agreeing with Destiny, but I have to here. Using the power to negotiate better trade relations with nations, and being able to use and flex a little bit of that like kind of soft power to engage in kind of forcing them to do some things that would make the situation better might have a positive effect. But I think the most positive effect that we can have is industrialization and more economic activity. I mean, I think Kuznets' curve is probably one of the better things about our world today, as we see income inequality kind of grow here in America. Well, it's growing here in America because it's decreasing rapidly in the developing world. That's why income inequality is growing here, is because in the second world and in the first world, people are going from pennies on the day to making dollars on the day, which to us both sound awful, but is 10 and 100-fold times better.
So Prime, I actually found stats on our Prime. So apparently the United States is the largest importer of Indian bricks. It's about $29 million a year, apparently. I think that if we want to impose, and of course the rest of them are like all European countries too, right? So like if the rest of them decided, hey, we're no longer going to take your bricks, right? If you don't do something about this problem, the United States said, hey, we're no longer taking your bricks. This would obviously massively affect the industry. It's going to cause some kind of harm to those people, I think, in the short term, right? Because now they might lose their jobs, right? Even if their job is like being a bonded laborer, right, in shitty conditions, right? But long term, like why wouldn't that be beneficial, right? To kind of force that change if we can through, just refusing to do business with these people, so long as this is an issue.
Does it actually force the change, though, is the question? Like, right, I feel like what Scott is getting at is like the general trend is towards progressive industrialization, right? So yeah, I mean it's a shitty situation. Like there are cases where in any individual case, if we had the option of saying no, you really shouldn't do that, and convincing someone they shouldn't, we would do it. But it seems like over time in these whatever we're going to call them, developing nations or whatever, that that there are positive economic benefits, and that yeah. So is it actually going to have the effect that you're saying? Is it going to force the change?
So it is what you're saying that if this is slavery, right, that we should not really do anything to impact the slavery, because long term it's having positive economic impacts for them and for the world.
Dooby,
I'm not saying that. No, I'm not saying that. I'm questioning whether or not I'm questioning whether or not what you're saying is are the options force the change, or with short-term harms, or let it ride? Like, is it actually going to force the change? That's what I want to know.
Well, if the United States and lots of like European nations are the people importing these slave bricks, right? If they no longer have these markets to sell to, like I can imagine that would have like a massive impact in the way they do business.
Right. So a bunch of poor people. So a bunch of poor people starve, and then the people who have money are still doing fine. And then what?
Well, the people who have money have nobody to sell to anymore. Right. So now they have less money, or hey, because they want to keep making money, but maybe less money, they stop having bonded labor, right? They stop having slavery.
I gave you an example of this already, Dooby, right? Which was in Bangladesh, right? They fired childhood workers in the ready-made garment industry in 1992 and 1993, and the conditions of these child laborers were worse. They ended up in the black market in prostitution and in the sex slave industry, right? The reason is because you're not solving the problem that causes a lot of these issues. Instead, you're exacerbating it. The issue here is poverty. So we have to figure out a way to tackle poverty in the third world, right? Because the fact of the matter is that many people in the West, it seems like this really weird kind of like almost like racist kind of view is this idea that people in the third world are just like backwards people with bad ideas, and if we bully them enough then they'll just do the right thing, when really what they're doing is they're people doing exactly what Destiny said, choosing the lesser of two evils, right? They're in a position where they don't have money, they can't feed their fucking family, and they have a baby crying with a bloated stomach from hunger pains, and a man comes around and says, I'll take your 9-year-old boy and I'll turn him into a man, and he's going to live a hard life, but you'll have food on your table. And they take that deal and they sell their child into slavery so that their other children can eat. One of the things you can look at when you look at the data is that you can find that people have made the claim that it's a cultural thing, and what they have found is that very often children that work in these industries or engage in child labor or engage in slavery, very often the entire family is not actually in slavery. Oftentimes what will happen is the boys go into slavery, or the boys and one of the girls go into slavery, and like it or not, this is what happens. They pick the smart girl and they go and get her educated, because they're hoping that that if they can put food on the table, she can be the one that gets educated.
Okay, I understand.
And they escape.
Yeah, I understand. But given that this is reality, right? So it does seem like my earlier statement was my question was like correct, right? So it seems like your position is, hey, if we stop doing business with these countries that are using slaves, right? If these people would actually like have it worse. So because they'd have it worse in the short term, and we don't have a way to like address the poverty that's leading them to agree to these deals in the first place, right? We should just keep doing business with countries that have slaves. It seems like that is your position.
No.
How is this? No, you
Why
just
are you
told me.
Such a bad faith?
You just told me that if we do not do this, and if they do file these slaves or whatever, or if they fire them, they might end up in worse conditions, right? So it seems like what you're saying is that we shouldn't use our influence to force this change through like just not buying their bricks anymore, right? So we shouldn't even attempt that, because they're going to suffer in the short term. So we should put up with them having slaves and just ride it out and wait for their economy to catch up.
Effective in this. Like
wait for their economy to catch up.
Such a lying sack of shit. Oh my god.
Stardust, give it a try.
Yeah. So
fuck, dude.
Again, there's research, and the research is mixed on whether sanctions would work on developing countries like India, oftentimes sanctions will just contribute to the problem of like what leads to people entering bonded labor contracts. And I think just in general, aid to these people, education to these people, making them aware that there are laws that protect them. The very fact that so many of them don't even realize that this is illegal, right? Is an issue.
But
sure, but this is another.
Can I please engage with this bullshit, please?
But this is India we're talking about. If this were in the United States, we could directly, try to educate these people and whatnot. But this is another nation with other laws, another government, right? So, given that we don't have a way to vote to give these people rights or whatever the fuck, right? So if we don't have that ability, and the only way we can affect the situation, it seems, is just through advocacy, being sad about it on the internet, maybe holding some rallies, right? Or I think using our economic power and the fact that we're buying up all these slave bricks, right? And just to try to force the change, right? So if none of those are on the table, it seems like what you're saying is, hey, we can't do anything about it. We can say, hey, this is a bad thing. We can maybe send people in there to give them pamphlets.
It's actually improved. Right? It's not like they haven't made improvements in it. Actually, I mean, yes, it's still really bad, but I believe that it's the amount of bonded labor has actually decreased, and it decreased by 60-some% between the early 2000s and then the 2010s. So it's not like they're not making progress in this. It's still really bad, but it used to be worse.
So. Yeah, but the claim by a lot of these activists for this topic, right, are that the reason they're saying that it's been reduced is because the government isn't counting people who are actually bonded laborers as bonded laborers, right? Because they have no evidence of a contract, or they just don't believe that that they don't have a way out of this, or whatever the fuck.
So, still not addressing the fact that they are addressing it, right? They are addressing
on
it.
Paper,
they are trying to not just on paper. They're addressing it. They're trying to make strides in this. Yes, there are cases where people are looking the other way, but they're still making effort. And I don't think it's right to punish developing countries, poor countries, where they're actually trying to fix the situation. I think if anything, we should be providing aid for the specific purpose of fixing that situation.
Can I engage just for a second?
One second.
He's been going back and forth lying about this.
Hold on. I promise you, Scott. I promise you'll be the star of the show. One second, okay? Just give us a second, okay? So it doesn't seem like the government is taking it actually seriously. First of all, you have to plead your case. It seems, from what I've gathered, right? You have to plead your case to authorities, and authorities can say, this actually doesn't count as bonded labor, right? Basically, what Dooby was trying to imply. And to say that we have to educate this group, well, there's an endless supply of poor people who don't know, right? And if the government was taking this seriously, it wouldn't be that, okay, you have come to me, you have said that you have been put in an illegal situation, right? It's illegal. An illegal situation, right? Effectively slavery. I'll hand you a piece of paper that says, oh, that's null and void. You get to walk away. Instead of taking action against the slaver. Oh, okay, we have a factory here that is using slave labor. Why is this person not in jail? Why is this person not in jail?
They should be in jail, but I think
they should be. They're not.
Part of the issue is that part of the issues. I was watching one of the documentaries on this. The people who are in these contracts are afraid of losing where they live, right? And from exiting this contract through the government. I linked something in your chat, Primecayes. It's between 2010 and not 2010, between I think it's 2000 and 2011. It's a 64% decrease in child labor. So yes, there are tons of issues, but they're making strides. It's they're still.
Child labor is different. At least the numbers I was giving you, that was not about child labor. That's not what I was.
We're talking about bonded labor, though, right? And a significant portion, a significant issue. Why that's so why that's so controversial is because of the incidence of child labor, because India has the most amount of child labor worldwide of all the countries.
I'm glad they're taking action against child labor. And let's assume those numbers are correct, right? Fine. But in terms of bonded labor, that's still, if we acknowledge that, a form of slavery, right?
Yeah.
Or an immoral coercion of work.
But you can't separate these.
Not actually
bonded labor specifically includes the children who are entered into those bonded labor contracts.
I've already given you that. That's fine. Whatever. I'm talking about the adults because we care about them too, right? Correct?
Okay.
You're missing the forest of the trees.
I'm sure I am. Okay. But so if they aren't actually shutting down these factories, according to the statistic that I found, it was that 96% of these factories are using bonded labor, or these kilns, brick kilns are using bonded labor. Then obviously that tells me that the government doesn't actually give a shit, right? That it's actually unsanctioned, unofficially sanctioned. Excuse me. And so that seems like it would take corrective action by other powers, at least by the buyers of those bricks, because then it is slave labor that we are benefiting from.
Sure, we could definitely maybe encourage specifically on that industry, right? But I think in general, I think that aid would be more useful in this case, and a lot of it. I think I was reading also I'd have to pull it up again. But there's a significant amount of the agriculture industry that has this debt that requires people to enter bonded labor contracts. So, I guess we could look at specific products that use this type of labor, but I don't know.
And I'll go to you, Scott, because you're bursting off. Should private corporations? There was another article. I didn't send it to you guys. But there are corporations who look at their supply lines, right? Their supply chains, and then they find these things. They find this here, and here, where slave labor is being used, and they do something about it. Usually this happens when there's an article and it points out, oh, you're using slave labor, then they start to fucking care. But one or the other, that's what they do. So should they be able to take away their business from those suppliers, even though it'll make those the lives of those individuals worse of the bonded laborers?
Who's that? To?
I said Scott. I said
okay.
At the very beginning.
Sure. Sorry, I'm trying to engage with a conversation anyways, I'm going to go back a little bit, right? Because Dooby, I have to deal with this because Dooby was lying through his fucking teeth and constantly mischaracterizing what my position was, and then dismissing what we were saying by saying that the only thing that you can possibly do is sanction these people and that there are no other alternatives, and saying that I'm against sanctions in these situations. There are a ton of things that you can do positively to affect change. Sanctions is going to exacerbate the situation, right? Number one, the biggest problem we have currently is that the government agencies that are raiding things and dealing with tariffs and dealing with import-export have a monopoly on so many things that it makes it difficult for other corporations and companies and buyers in the market to educate the American public or the consumer on where their resources and goods are coming from unless they try and get educated themselves. So that's a problem. I don't know if there's necessarily an immediate solution to that, but one of the solutions that we can do is begin to purchase items and purchase, we have an ultimate kind of end goal responsibility as the person that is the consumer of products, right? And so one of the things you can do right now, if you live in Europe and you own an iPhone or a Samsung, I'm just going to say this, every person in Europe that owns an iPhone or a Samsung, you're an asshole, because there's Fairphone. Fairphone 4 exists, right? Fairphone 4 is 650 euros. It's a nicer fucking phone than anything Apple or Samsung have made. It's a 5G phone, and every single it has a 10 out of 10 rating from iFixit. Every single solitary piece of metal in that, even the Oh my God, it's not cobalt. What is it called? What they
mine? Coltan.
Coltan. Even the coltan is using ethically sourced coltan, and they use recycled tin. So we as consumers have to start understanding that these people are doing economic development in the Congo. These people are doing economic development in Ghana. These people's manufacturing bases in South America, where they hire women from families and give them healthcare and living wages. So as a consumer, you have a responsibility to educate yourself and try and be involved in this. And I think that's part and parcel of kind of like what we're doing here on Twitch. But in terms of what we can do in India, we can also invest in things like education. You can give to charities that do good things, right? Like actually do something. Like, I'm not going to say it for Primecayes channel, but like for all of you that have donated to my channel, you could just as easily have donated to Save the Bees, and you just as easily could have donated for fucking schools in India. Like, I appreciate it, but there are things you can do with your money. There are things you can do with your purchasing power. And there are things the state can do in terms of negotiating changes. But this idea that we're going to sanction, it's literally attacking the problem by, that's literally all it is. It's attacking the problem and causing more of the problem. It's just fucking stupid.
Okay, so I don't know why you said I lied, because I acknowledged earlier.
That's why.
I acknowledged earlier your ability to be sad about it on Twitch and to hold rallies and to advocate for people using other bricks, whatever the fuck, right? But given that this is such a massive industry in India, I don't think doing don't buy fair phones and don't buy like slave bricks, whatever the fuck, is like realistically going to do anything about the issue. Right. I don't think there's any indication that this has worked in any of the other places where this kind of like a public fucking like rallying cry is actually like done anything. Right? So they've done this about diamonds. People still buy blood diamonds. They've done this about shrimp. People still buy shrimp from slavers. They've done this about fucking lithium. They still buy that shit from slavers too. Like, this isn't like, it doesn't seem like this works. Right. So I mean, there's a massive documentary about exactly this issue, the brick kiln industry in India and its use of like slaves, years ago, all over the fucking news. Still a massive problem, right? So it doesn't seem like this works. I think that if we're going to be realistic about the issue, right, we should be advocating not just for people not to buy slave bricks, right, but for our government to also vote with its wallet, to say, hey, we no longer want to do business with slavers, right, and yeah, again, you can say the people who are undergoing this debt slavery right now, they're in poverty and they're going to suffer. Well, hey, if you're in favor of sending money to them right now to educate them, whatever the fuck, why not just say, hey, we can replace their bonded labor by having activist organizations go there and feed them when they lose their brick kiln jobs, right? While these people are forced to change the way that they're doing business, right? So it seems like, again, earlier I said that it seems like your position, and it seems like Ukerist's position, is to wait for the problem to work itself out and to advocate for people to be more educated, to like for the economy to industrialize and for people to get out of poverty, and that's going to take a really long fucking time. And we can nudge it in that direction. We can nudge it in that direction. But yes, it is your position. Yes, it is your position. It's not. I don't know why you don't just fucking own it, because that is what you're saying. You're saying, hey, the sanctions won't work. We need to do something about poverty, but we have no ability to fix poverty in India from the United States. Right. So it seems like what you're saying is that because we have no ability to do anything about poverty in India from the United States, we should just accept.
Nobody is saying that, Dooby. That's exactly what you're lying. Just stop it.
That's exactly what you're saying.
Okay, so
you're saying that our government should keep buying slave bricks because you think that
not buying slave bricks is
right.
Okay.
That's what you're saying.
I linked something in the group chat. Okay. This position that the government isn't doing enough isn't supported by what I just linked.
And that was the other thing that you mentioned, Stardust, and I think maybe you weren't making the connection quite, but the idea of why childhood slavery is so important when talking about bonded labor is intergenerational slavery. right? If you can get the children out of a lot of these things and get them educated, you don't have a problem that keeps repeating itself from generation.
That's the main issue, yeah. With children who are working 14 hours a day, like they don't have time for anything else, right? There's no time for any type of education. So getting the children out of bonded labor is most important. It's I mean, yeah, like you're saying, like this, intergenerational slavery. So.
Wait, but Scott said that getting them out of that, right, would lead them to working in like the sex industry and shit like that.
Well, we want to enable them to get out of it. We want to enable them to get out of it in a way that that we're fixing the cause of that, right? We want to fix the cause.
So donate some money to like some charity organization in India, but still don't buy slave bricks. Like I don't. Why would we keep buying the thing?
Sure, fine. That's fine. If we want to go specifically and target specific slavery produced industries, then that's fine. I'm fine with that. But like sanctions as a whole, I think I would think very hard about that. So
yeah, what I'm advocating for, to be clear, is for the United States to not buy slave bricks, basically.
Okay, that's fine.
That's it, right? So given that we are the people that buy the majority of these bricks, like it seems like us not buying them unless they rework the way that they're doing business would force a lot of these people to rework the way they're doing business because we're their biggest market.
Again, this is why I brought up Bangladesh, right? Your argument is don't buy these goods, sanction these goods. What happened when we've done this in the past?
You just advocated for people to do this in the individual sense, right? You advocated for individuals not to buy these things. Yes, you did.
No, I did not.
Yes, you did.
No, I did not. No, I did not.
You said they should buy the Fairphone over the Samsung phone because the Fairphone does. Okay, so wouldn't you also say that individuals shouldn't buy slave bricks? That they should vote with their wallet and put their money somewhere else?
There is a difference between advocating for specific companies that are giving alternatives, that are helping people, that are setting up fair labor in these specific areas, right? The money that you are spending on a Fairphone is going into the Congo, right? And it is giving money and aid support against Congolese warlords and economically competing with them to free the Congolese people. It is doing the same thing in Ghana, where people are literally naked miles underground and coming out with chunks of metal and getting like chronic silicosis, smashing shit, right? So there are other places in the same region where they are supporting growth, where your money is specifically going towards getting people jobs, bringing people out of poverty.
So then you'd be fine if maybe we did sanction these places, but
I don't need to hear
that. Okay, fine, whatever. Well, other people, if we did sanction these people, but also then funded growth, right? So on the other, so it's like we can stop buying the bricks. So the government can say like we aren't buying these bricks, but on the other hand, we are putting money into these economic development programs that will hopefully eventually increase or lower the economic divide between citizens and stuff, and so that people won't get taken advantage of in the first place.
Yeah,
it seems
it seems like why not just say, hey, yeah, we shouldn't buy slave bricks, but if we identify brick companies within India that aren't having like slave labor or whatever the fuck, we should buy from them instead. Right? Like why not advocate for that rather than advocating for us to keep buying the slave bricks? Like that doesn't make any sense.
Because that's not what you're saying.
That is what I'm saying.
What you're saying is
exactly what I said.
What you're saying is sanctioning and boycotting goods on a massive scale.
No, I'm saying the United States should no longer buy bricks from slavers. So if we identify a company within India that is not doing that, okay. So if we identify,
you support harsh sanctions and boycotts, correct?
I support the United States specifically not importing bricks from India that are made with slave labor.
How many bricks does the United States government buy?
The U.S. is the largest importer of these bricks.
No. The United States government. How much does the United States government buy?
I would need to look it up for you, right?
Right.
But I think the government should not allow individuals citizens to purchase these bricks. Yeah.
Right. You're talking about massive scale sanctions on underdeveloped nations where the problem is poverty, and you think you're going to solve it by striking more poverty at them, despite the evidence showing time and time again that when you do these types of large sweeping actions, what occurs is these people end up in worse conditions.
But what if we created programs to mitigate for that?
No, hold on. Or you just buy the bricks from people in India who don't have slave labor, so you incentivize that behavior to not have fucking slave labor, because if you do have slave labor, you're not going to be able to sell to the United States, right? So
that's a totally different thing.
That's what I've been saying this entire fucking time.
No, it's not, Dooby.
When I say slave bricks, are you assuming that I mean all bricks from India? No, I'm saying slave bricks.
No, you're saying sanctioning India. Now you're saying targeted sanctions, which is better. But even
we're specifically talking about targeting this industry.
This industry? Oh my God! So you're going
to if people within this industry are using slave labor to make bricks, we do not buy those bricks, and we don't allow citizens to import those bricks. Right? We identify people within India that are not doing this, and we buy from them instead. Like why? I don't understand what this is so
that difference. Because I guess because you're intentionally pretending to not understand concepts that
I don't think that's true. I think you're stumbling over the dumb shit you've been saying, because I've been very clear. I think I've been very specific about my language. I think you say things and then 5 minutes later forget you said them, because again a little bit ago you advocated for individuals to not buy these things or to vote with their wallets, right? Now then when I brought that up, you said, "Oh no, I didn't say individuals shouldn't do that."
Okay.
So like
I never said that.
Why does your frog have an eye ring?
Now we do the whole. Now we're doing the whole meta argument. All right, that's fine. So everyone else, right? In terms of these sanctions, first of all, I disagree with you, Stardust, with the before we get to that, I disagree with you on the link that you sent that it proves that the government is doing anything. It's a plan as to what the government should be doing.
It gives them a B on their government response. So
gives them a B. Okay, right, but it's not actually shutting down these slave killings.
So we're just going to go to economic war with countries that we just disagree with on stuff.
On slavery, yeah, maybe on slavery, yeah, sure. Maybe.
That aren't getting rid of it fast enough.
Then are letting it flourish if you're not shutting it down by the source, so you can say that again. We can educate these people. You can say that we can educate these people as to not get into the bondage labor in the first place, which is great, right? 100%. However, if you keep the slave masters in place, it will find more slaves.
How is it flourishing?
There's 125,000. I will explain to you. There's 125,000 brick kilns in India. And then 96% of them use bondage labor. 23 million people, from the estimate that I found, up to 23 million. I found 8 million, I found 18 million, I found 23 million, so it's fuzzy numbers here. But are in this industry. So it sounds like India ain't doing shit. That's what it sounds like.
Did you miss the part where they've been taking measures to decrease this?
I know. Yes, I hear you.
So it's just not fast enough for you.
They're not America.
So if it's not decreasing fast enough, then it's flourishing, basically.
If the slavers are not in jail, then yeah, I don't think it's fast enough. I think that's fair enough to say, right? And that we punish the slavers, and we don't just say, hey, person in slavery, you are free. That's one step, sure, right? But then you like arrest the person doing the crime, or they're just gonna keep doing it.
Sure, I agree with I agree with the idea of just specifically targeting the brick industry, but I feel like I don't know what you're proposing other than that. Like I know what you're saying as far as like the laws, as far as like putting slavers in jail, but like how are you going to make that happen?
Primecayes.
Well,
this is literally what you're advocating
I'm
for.
trying to.
How are you going to make that happen?
Scott. I want to talk to Stardust. She's really nice. Right? I like her a lot. She's cool. All right, let's give her a try.
Shut up, Prime.
Stardust.
I hate you. No, I'm just kidding.
So you're asking how do we make that happen? We put economic pressure on the country, right? We start there.
How?
And that can be one, sanctioning the BRICS themselves, and then maybe possibly further sanctions on other areas of, depending on what we if we care about it, or how much we care about it. Excuse me. And then also, if you want to pair this up, saying, okay, we want to give you the stick and the carrot as well. For the people who are exiting, right? If this government is helping people exit, well, here are funds to help them transition to a new life, right? And if you're working towards these milestones, right? If we can actually see real progress, then we'll lift those sanctions altogether. In fact, you won't need them if you're targeting slave kilns.
I think we just need to target, if you're going to target anything, just target specifically the BRICS, right?
I said that.
Well, I mean, you were saying other things as well, right? You were
I said possibly.
Okay, possibly. So now no longer possibly?
It depends. I can't. If you want me to design an exact plan,
well, I mean, look, I don't have a problem with targeting the BRICS. I'm just saying that
a basic framework.
I just have a problem with sanctions that might aggravate the causes of why people enter these contracts in the first place, right? A lot of it in the agricultural industry. 60% of India's population works in the agriculture industry, and that's like being generous. And there's a high rate of suicide there. So aggravating, and also they had that huge protest last year. So aggravating the causes that lead people to enter these contracts is going to lead to more suicide. A lot of people are going to starve, and it's going to fucking suck. So yeah.
Great, don't sanction the agriculture industry. Done. All right, moving on.
That's not how economies work, Primecayes. Like, you're literally advocating for things that are going to cause children to be sold into sex slavery, that are going to cause people to commit suicide. That's going to cause starvation. You're going to cripple economies, right? And the reason you're doing this is because you've created a standard that says India must be as good as we are in the first world at fighting the corruption. They are fighting to stop this. And what
they've committed to eradicating slavery by 2030. They've committed to eradicating slavery by 2030.
Oh, wow. They committed. Just like the target goals that the U.S. always sets, right? India, right, which has a long history of caring about the undercast, right? They are actually going to, by 2030, right, in 8 years,
I mean, I think
they are going to get 23 million people out of bondage, right? But
kind of sounds like the white moderate that MLK warned us about in his letter to Birmingham. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
You want to put a timetable on another person's freedom, Stardust?
Actually, it's interesting. One of the major arguments from slave skeptic, right? Slavery skeptic Americans way back when was that if you free the slaves, they're not educated, they don't know how to read, that they don't have any property. So if you're going to set them free, they're going to have nowhere to go. They're going to end up dying because they're just like animals and they can't take care of themselves. Right. So and this was a major concern for lots of people who didn't believe in slavery, but didn't think you could release the slaves because they'd actually be worse off.
That's not really my argument.
It's kind of what you guys are saying. Right?
No, if we
go out of our way to force this country to stop enslaving people,
really my argument.
The slaves might end up, well, not your argument, but I think Scott's argument. The slaves might end up in sex slavery, they might end up depressed, and might kill themselves. Right? So it sounds very similar to me.
Okay,
yeah, we get it.
Wait, real quick.
Steven, please.
Okay. This is, listen, Scott's got a lot of crazy shit on this panel, all right? Now it's my turn to say that Scott is absolutely correct, okay? There are stages that economies take when it comes to reaching full levels of happy middle-class industrialization. Now, people will look at some economies and say, wow, these people work in sweatshops. We need to eradicate all of the sweatshops immediately. But the next step of that isn't going to be, wow, you got rid of all the sweatshops. Now Amazon and Google moved in and everybody's working cozy programmer jobs. It's, oh, okay, well, everybody's going to go back to fucking subsistence farming and talking about what jobs they want to work in the commune. So if you have countries who have large swaths of their economy, built around varying levels of slavery or bondage, if you come in and you just sanction the fuck out of the economy, it's not like they're magically going to invent all of the institutions and economic measures necessary to employ people in ways that we would consider acceptable. So you have pathways to success on this. You have markers every year to make sure that you're meeting your obligations, and you do what you can from an external point, whether that's aid, whether that's economic deals, whether that's some sort of FDI, foreign direct investment, whether that's IMF loans, whatever it is, to slowly ease that economy towards that. If you just start sanctioning the fuck out of them, then everything will just get fucked. It'll collapse. You'll feel better because you're not buying slave labor from anybody, but instead the people that aren't selling themselves into sex slavery will just be starving to death on the streets. And you haven't really accomplished anything besides make yourself feel a little bit better about the situation.